Hey folks, it's Michael here with the ccerp podcast, Cypress Creek Ecological Restoration Project. So, today we're going to have an interview with Jim Fordyce at the University of Tennessee talking about ecology and things like that. It's a basic thing we need to get down, ecological restoration project. Well, what the heck is ecology and why is it important? And then in the future, we can talk about other detailed things, but being a teacher and having a degree in philosophy, I like to set the context first and things like that and get all ordered. So that's the way it's going to be. Now, maybe a little brain dead, working at, I don't know, 70 or 90% since my sleep wasn't too good last night. I kept waking up for some reason. So if I'm a little stupid or if I miss some good questions, I'm sorry. Um, it'll be better in the future, but Jim will take care of it. But so we'll go ahead and without further ado, hey Jim, how's it going?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being on. Much appreciated. Um, so can you tell the folks about yourself and what you do and your background?
Yeah, I'm originally from Detroit area of Michigan, from Dearborn, Michigan, and I did my undergrad in biology at Western Michigan University in Kalamazoo, the home of Gibson guitar. Um, and then I quite enjoyed biology in general, and so I stuck around and I did a master's at Western Michigan, and then did a little bit of teaching in the Kalamazoo area as well as worked some odd jobs. And in about 97, I decided to go on and get a PhD because why not stay in school if you're enjoying it, right? So I went out to University of California, Davis, and did a PhD out there, primarily studying how insect behavior might modify plant chemistry by directly manipulating the chemistry of the plant through their behaviors. And feeding on particular parts of the plant would actually make the plant better for the caterpillars to feed on. And so that's largely what my what my work out there was about. And then upon graduation, I've been in Knoxville, Tennessee since then, primarily working on plant-insect interactions and community ecology, and a little bit of, population genetics, differentiation of different populations and the factors that drive that. And I primarily actually teach now nothing but statistics courses because
Wow.
ecology and evolution is a very quantitative field. In fact, most of the common tools that people use in statistics were actually invented by one of the important characters in the modern synthesis of evolutionary thought. So there's a long history of stats, as it were, in ecology and evolution, and that's what I've been ending up teaching now primarily.
Wow. Who's that person?
R.A. Fisher.
Okay, I thought so. That's what I was going to guess. I wasn't sure, but yeah, I know about that. I learned that afterwards. I know I got a degree in math, did a course on basic stat theory before I ever knew any stats, so I got it kind of backwards the way I did things. But yeah, I remember Fisher coming up and then learning later that he was a biologist. That's like,
Yeah.
wow, pretty cool.
Yeah, it is pretty cool. And then, there's lots of fun things with stats. That's why stats is so fun. Like the T distribution was derived by a guy that worked for Guinness Beer.
Oh yeah. I remember that. Yeah, that's one thing I learned that was interesting too. I wish I would come up in the course, make it more interesting
Yeah.
instead of like, because you know how it is with like math in particular, and the math people, it's all like theory.
Right. And it can come across as really dry, but it's actually quite fun if you can get over the initial intimidation.
Yeah.
I was intimidated just like everybody else was when I first started thinking about math and statistics, but it's such a huge part of the day-to-day operations of doing the science that I just kind of gradually became more and more comfortable with it. And
Yeah.
I was convinced by a number of people to just start teaching the class. So that's what I do now.
Yeah.
Which
Yeah, at least.
often throws people off because they'll know that I'm an ecologist and I'm in the Department of Ecology, and then they'll ask me, so what do you teach? And I say statistics, and they're like, well, that doesn't make sense. But I try to convince them that it does. It actually does make sense.
Yeah. Variation, averages, populations.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
But yeah, and actually, I think one of the best articles I've read about some theory of statistics and the philosophy of it is by Stephen Gould. The median is not the message. Is that famous article?
Yeah, that sounds familiar. Definitely. He talked a lot about that. Used a lot of baseball metaphors and stuff like that.
Yeah, I got to read his books more. I haven't read them enough, but maybe I'll post that in the show notes if I recall. But really good article. But did you do much, like, were you outdoors a lot when you were growing up?
Yeah, even though I grew up in a pretty urban area, there was what I thought was a forest, but in retrospect, it was an old field with pretty mature trees, probably 100-year-old trees. And yeah, I was always running around through the alleys of our urban area. There was a lot of toads there, so I used to love catching toads. That was probably the first organism that I became fascinated with. And then insects, I absolutely loved.
And then girls came along.
And kind of playing with them and looking at them and stuff like that. So I've always been really, really interested in being outdoors. When I was a really young kid, I guess I was in second grade. My parents put me on an airplane and I flew to North Carolina to go to Ranger Rick Camp, which was done by the National Wildlife Federation at that time. And so, yeah, I've always been really interested in the outdoors and basically how organisms kind of do their thing, and enjoyed, observing it or feeling like I was part of it. So that was always an important thing for me.
Oh, I didn't know like Ranger Rick was actually a thing. When I was in Boy Scouts as a kid, I know some people would use the term, but of course, being a little punk kid and being stupid at the time, I wouldn't really look into things. I didn't know much, but so is the Ranger Rick thing still going on, or is that?
No, it's I think that it's now being done somewhere in Colorado, but that was the last I had heard. I think it's officially called National Wildlife Federation Camp, but we all knew it as Ranger Rick Camp.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was wondering if it was.
You hear about it from Ranger Rick magazine, so so that's where that was your exposure to it.
Which magazine?
Ranger Rick.
Oh,
The kids' version of National Wildlife magazine. So it's an educational kind of little magazine for kids. It was pretty cool for me as a kid. I remember getting those and looking forward to getting them every month. You get a new issue, and there was lots of cool pictures and little pieces of trivia. And as a 7-year-old, you actually looked at it as like, wow, I'm learning all this cool information every month.
Yeah, cool. How long was camp?
It was 2 weeks.
What'd
2
y'all
weeks
do?
in the Blue Ridge Mountains, just pretty close to Asheville, North Carolina. So yeah, so it's interesting. Now I'm back here, and this is now where I live.
Cool.
In the mountains. So yeah, it's pretty cool.
Did they give you a camp in tents in Ranger Rick Camp, or?
It was good old fashioned cabin camping, with bunk beds and stuff like that. But it was definitely a really good time.
What kind of things did you do and learn?
It was actually kind of interesting how it was set up, because you would pick electives, and so there were things ranging from basically insect biology or herpetology. There was even things on like photography and writing, like poetry and stuff like that. So it was all kind of a very integrated kind of thing. It was a really cool experience. I actually found out at a scientific meeting I went to maybe 10 years ago that a colleague of mine who was a professor at Mississippi State University, he and I were actually at camp together.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's cool.
There's a picture of all out of the hill, and he's like, "Hey, that's me," and I'm like, Wait. And I was sitting right next to him, so it was pretty,
wow.
It was
That's even closer.
Funny. This weird, this small world thing, yeah.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah. But no, it was a fun experience. It was pretty darn cool, definitely.
But yeah, photography, that's something that some people might not think is actually important. Just like if people do the iNaturalist thing, I do that. Take a lot of photos, post them on there. I've got a major backlog. I must have, like, I don't know, 100, 200 observations I still got to get on there.
Yeah.
But it drives you crazy. I've got like, on my iPhone, I've got like 19,000 pictures, and most of them are just nature stuff.
Yeah. Yep.
Like, where's the family picture again? Where's my friend again?
Stuff is pretty cool though. I think that I think it's actually going to be as more and more people do it, and that database gets larger and larger. I think it's going to become more and more like actually super useful.
Yeah.
For scientists, just having that much data where you've observed something occurring. It seems like it's a really kind of minor thing. It's like nothing's really going to become of it, but I suspect that that's going to be really important data as we get more and more people uploading things. I know that for some projects I've done out west, we have iNaturalist. Kind of we're using that platform essentially for the purpose of citizen science, and it's actually quite helpful because somebody will take a picture of a particular insect and you'll know where it was taken, and you'll be like, oh, that's cool, we did not know that was in that location type thing.
Yeah.
So it's a pretty neat thing.
So yeah, if some people get out there and do that, they might actually find something that is rare or people don't know about. There's still stuff to discover in this world. It's good to document your own things, but
and the more you do, the more you learn, and the more you learn about something, the more you want to learn about that thing.
Yeah,
once you, as I'm sure you said that you've started learning the plants and stuff like that in the area where you're around. It's like once you can recognize the plants, the forest looks entirely different.
Oh yeah.
Because before you do that, everything just looks kind of. It's like birds, it's like until you know your birds, maybe in your head you can imagine like 10 different things. There's a blue jay, there's a robin, there's a duck. But once you actually get to know the names of all the birds, suddenly the forest, it looks a lot different. Everything looks different the more you know about it. And
true.
So I think that things like, encouraging people to just take pictures of things and send them in, iNaturalist and have them be identified and stuff. It's just a really cool thing because it's a way to educate yourself on what's out there. And again, the world looks a lot different the more you can kind of see, the different players as opposed to it just being that's outside nature and that's it.
Yeah.
Once you see all the different pieces, I think it's kind of a nice way to kind of appreciate what's going on and how complex it really is.
Yeah, and I recommend that for people. I know exactly what you're talking about because it happened to me. At first, it was like, it's just a bunch of green stuff and a bunch of green leaves. And now it's like when people get more familiar with it, you get more involved. And it's like it becomes like home and family and friends. It's like you see some tree and then every time you pass it, you see it again. Then you start wondering how it's doing and how healthy it is and stuff like that. And
absolutely,
you see the interactions and it's like, you want something complex. It's like I have a degree in math. It's like, as I tell people, calculus is easy. You want something complicated? Do biology. That's complex. Math doesn't adapt. Quadratic equations stay quadratic equations. They don't adapt to anything.
Yep. Yeah, and you can actually understand things in math, and that's a joke with there's a lot of people. There's a whole group of or section of ecology, which is math, essentially. It's, mathematical theory and it's theoretical expectations and stuff. And when I took a mathematical modeling class when I was in grad school, the joke that the professor said was, the mathematician will always look for his keys under the spotlight in the in the parking lot, even though he knows he lost the keys in the bushes. Because under the spotlight, he can see what he's doing.
Yeah.
So, it's like the whole idea of like the math is complicated, but it's a simplification of the natural world, which still is a challenge for all of us today. It's a lot more complicated than people would think.
And then if people get out there, dang, I forgot what that creature is. It's not coming to me, but something like a newt out here. Lizard kind of thing. Stupid. I can't think of it. But actually, one time I was out on the trail and I came across two of them mating and made a video. and I took some pictures and put it on iNaturalist, and someone said that that was actually interesting because they're outdoors, and they're not seen as much. Their mating behavior isn't known as much. They don't know as much about it. And here I just thought I was taking this little video, and if I would have known it was like a
big deal,
then I would have taken a longer video. But
yeah.
I mean, here I'm just like me, a little like nobody, and other people can do the same thing. Come across something that isn't as well known, or people want to know more about, or is rare.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
So, it could be something, a new discovery or exploration for people in general, and not just us. But it's one thing we got to look at is not just, well, everyone already knows that. Why should I do it? Well, what about you?
Right.
It's like,
yep.
Discover things on your own.
Yeah, and it's we certainly don't know nearly as much as people think we do.
Yeah.
There's a lot more mystery out there than I think a lot of people appreciate, and I think that's true in most fields. Is we have kind of a view that people have that all worked out, and in reality we really don't.
Yeah.
We're still like in the baby steps of trying to learn how especially really complex systems are operating. Mm-hmm. And those complex systems are complex because there's a lot of moving parts. And so an important step is to kind of, at least understand the important moving parts in the system, kind of understand how it operates. So.
And that's a good segue to another question about what is ecology, but complexity in ecology. But before we do that, let me say, like, did you get interested in nature and stuff on your own when you were a kid, or like, did you learn from your parents, or what?
I think my parents always encouraged it. I just think I always just had this kind of curiosity about the natural world. As far back as I can remember being very young, I was always interested in, catching critters and looking at the critters and letting them go, and then, being interested in just kind of animals in general. So my parents certainly encouraged me to do that. My dad was a veterinarian, so he knew a little bit about animals, obviously, but I wasn't interested in cows and horses. I was interested in the weird in the backyard. And so, I was always super fascinated with the natural world. And somewhat amusingly, like now professionally, I do this. My mom just gets a kick out of it. She thinks it's really funny that, like, I can't believe you actually are getting paid to do what you were doing when you were 4.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, no, that's just always been an important part of my life. Even growing up in an urban area, I could find lots of interesting organisms just in the hedgerow by the house, and see really cool things. And that's despite the fact that I'm a total arachnophobe. I still am to this day. I'm terrified of spiders. Like, my adrenaline goes up, and I can rationalize with myself. It's like, if there's anybody in the world that shouldn't be an arachnophobe, it's probably somebody who does arthropods for a living. But yeah, there's just something about them. So even as a kid, it's like it totally creeped me out. But I was always willing to go back in and crawl in because there might be other cool beetles or something, which never bothered me at all. It was just the 8-legged guys. But yeah, no, for my whole life, it's just been a thing that I've been interested in.
Cool. Yeah, I think I grew up, in basically kind of the same time, and it was better off back then. I think we were like free-range kids before free-range kids was a thing.
Yeah.
So nowadays, like, if a parent is worried about letting their kids be free range, and I guess you could at least do it like under supervision. People should at least let the kids get out, enjoy nature, explore on their own and learn, and just maybe stay around to supervise them if you don't want to let them run around. But
right.
And I think it's natural in us, just like E.O. Wilson has said with his biophilia hypothesis, and I know Baron Heinrich, talked to him a few times on a different podcast. Same idea that there's just something in us that it's in our nature to like the natural world.
Yeah. I think, yeah, and I think it's important because, in my view, it seems like culturally we've been going for a long time with this kind of idea that we're separate from nature. So we're observing some other play, not realizing that we're actually part of the play, that we are characters in the play.
True.
And so that's another reason why I think it's just really good for people to kind of just to go outside, to kind of appreciate the fact that, we are doing what we do, and we build buildings and we build these huge infrastructures because that's what humans do. But
yeah.
we are still part of the natural world. It's I think erroneous to think that somehow we're separated from it and
True.
we're looking in on it.
Amen.
Yeah. Because then we start thinking like, oh yeah, well we can control these things and we can like actually, kind of basically manage the natural world entirely for our own purposes. And I think we're discovering now that that's a little naive. And there's been a lot of times in history where we've discovered the hard way that is a very kind of naive view to think that we are not part of it, because ultimately we are part of it. Emergent diseases, that's a whole field of ecology there, disease ecology.
Yeah. Huh.
Where do they come from and stuff like that. So I think that it's really important.
Just like Horace said, the ancient Latin writer, Roman writer, something like, to paraphrase, he said, "You can throw nature out on a pitchfork, but yet she will find her way back."
That seems about right.
Yeah. Cool. So I guess that makes it even better. We were talking about complexity and how we're part of things too. So what is ecology?
Yeah, so ecology is first of all, I'll say it's a big field, and it tends to encompass a lot of different things. My favorite definition of ecology is actually the definition that is used in one of the kind of classic textbooks in ecology that was written by Began and Townsend and Harper, and they define ecology as the scientific study of the distribution and abundance of organisms and the biotic and abiotic factors that determine distribution and abundance. And that sounds kind of dry and boring, but I think that encompasses exactly what ecology is trying to do. It's basically trying to figure out, why does everything seem to have a place, or simply, I guess I also consider evolutionary biology to be a component of ecology, because that is where evolution is occurring, is in the thing in the world. And I think that the question is like, we have all this great diversity. Why isn't there just one organism on the planet that does everything? Why do we have more than one species on the planet? And so, that is in part, what ecologists are trying to understand. Like, why do we see certain organisms here and not there? And now, for a lot of us, or for a lot of things, it's pretty obvious. It's like, oh, you find cactuses in the desert because cactuses are adapted to dry, arid, warm climates, and you don't expect to see, other things, and you don't expect to see a cactus, in the tundra, for example. And that's really easy for us to think about now, but even 150 years ago, it was really unclear. Like, what were the constraints? Why can't we do this? And so
interesting.
So ecology. I think that the roots of ecology were probably in population modeling, going back to the 1800s or even early 1800s with Malthus, where he just basically showed that something has to constrain population growth, because if it doesn't, you'll get exponential growth, and the whole world will be covered by one particular species if there's nothing to kind of prevent that. And then that's where you start to think about, well, is it other organisms that are keeping it from becoming an exponential kind of growth mess, or is it limiting resources? And if it is limiting resources, what are those resources, and what are the important resources for one group of organisms and another? And then when you start talking about, so that's kind of what population ecology is. And then when you think about a bunch of interacting populations, that usually falls underneath what we refer to as community ecology. So that's just organisms that are interacting at the same place and time, in some kind of defined area. And, what determines, diversity? Like, is it dominated by one plant or one animal, or is it, kind of evenly distributed among a bunch of different plants and different animals? And those are all things, again, thinking about distribution and abundance, thinking about interactions that determine that, as well as resource availability. And so then you can get to really large ecological type things, which falls underneath what we refer to as ecosystem ecology. And ecosystem ecology is really about how the biotic and the abiotic components of the planet interact. So for an ecosystem ecologist, you're interested in, like, where is all the carbon at any given time? Is it, in the biomass? Is it is it being stored in the soil? Is it being released into the atmosphere? How does that, affect, other parts of the whole system? How does it maybe affect, how nitrogen is being moved around the system? So it's very kind of writ large. Ecosystem ecology is really thinking about how life actually affects all the abiotic components of the environment. And so, that's very different than somebody who just studies the population ecology. And that's why ecology being really big, because it does encompass so many things. But I'll stand by the definition that I think overall ecology is simply the study of distribution and abundance. Why are things where they are, and what do they do when they get there? Why can't we leave? So.
And then just in case some folks didn't catch it, you talked about biotic and abiotic. So what the hell is biotic, and what the heck is... Sorry, I didn't mean to say what the hell. I just slipped. I'm tired. I meant to say what the heck. What the heck is biotic and abiotic?
So that's great. You're making me look good in case my mom knows. Yeah. So when we talk about biotic interactions, we're talking about when organisms interact. So, a hawk eating a rabbit, that's a biotic interaction. It's also a biotic interaction if you're the rabbit eating the plant. Plants competing for a resource, or animals competing for a resource, would be an example of a biotic interaction. And usually, oftentimes, it's those biotic interactions, especially competitive interactions, that determine how big a population can get. If there's only so much food for so many rabbits, that's going to limit how big the population of rabbits can get, because they'll start to run out of food. And they'll obtain what's referred to as the carrying capacity for an area, which is the number of rabbits that can live in that area given the amount of resources. So all in diseases, predation, all those kinds of things would be things that would fall underneath biotic interactions. And then abiotic things are those interactions with the environment that are not living parts of the environment. So, here in Knoxville 2 days ago, we dropped down well below freezing, which is entirely uncharacteristic time of the year. And as a consequence, I saw on the walk home, I think 5 dead squirrels.
Wow.
That were run over, but they were run over in a parking lot. Like, if you see a squirrel run over, usually it's a car going 55 miles an hour. It's not somebody backing out, but they were shivering. And so that clearly that killed a lot of squirrels. That would be an example of an abiotic interaction, a flood, or any kind of chemistry, really. If you have, an area that's salty, this is why, you have plants that live in salt marshes, but they can't live in fresh water. So the presence of the salt in the water would be an example of abiotic factor that's determining distribution and abundance. And so with that definition, you're always, kind of keeping your eye on both balls that are happening at the same time.
It's complicated.
Which is, how are the organisms interacting, and how is that determining things? And then how are those organisms interacting with the abiotic or non-living components of the system? The giant asteroid at the KT boundary that took out the dinosaurs, that would be an example of a very dramatic abiotic effect of something, right? Or an abiotic factor that affected populations. So, yeah.
So, I guess another one would be the biological influencing the non-biological, influencing the biological, like when the Romans salted the fields of the, ooh, dang, who was it? It slipped my mind. I just almost had it when they were the Carthaginians. Yeah, they defeated the Carthaginians and salted the fields, and then nothing could grow, wiped out everything.
Yeah, well, and you have kind of, which are actually very interesting places to study, but at least out west, there are a lot of places where there historically were mines. And so you have these large areas where you have mine tailings, which are all the leftovers after you've extracted the stuff you want that you're mining out of the earth. There's all these leftovers that tend to be just covered in, pretty bad, like heavy metals like lead and arsenic and stuff like that. And those areas, the vegetation associated with those areas are very, very different, obviously, because of those abiotic, conditions. But you still see vibrant, plants that can deal with it. They're very happy, and that would be an example of where the abiotic conditions are limiting the movement, or where plants can establish themselves.
I think we have a similar thing in the Davy Crockett National Forest, like northeast of here. I think if I'm remembering the forest correctly, because of some mining, there's some trace minerals that are more abundant there, and so you might want to be careful about where you forage out there or which water you drink, some things like that.
Yeah. Yep. And so, so those kind of but what's interesting is that there's also, interesting things that organisms do to the abiotic environment that can have these cascading consequences. A lot of cave systems, obviously the water is eroding it, but a lot of cave systems are also created by bacteria that are what are called chemolithoautotrophs. Which is just basically a really big way of saying that they don't use sunlight and they don't feed on other bacteria. So they're using basically elements that are in the rock. And as a consequence of eating those elements that are in the rock, they change the pH of the water, which then can cause the cave to effectively form at a faster rate because the water is more acidic. And then a lot of times we don't really think about that, organisms have that effect on the abiotic environment, except of course humans, which can have a huge effect on the abiotic environment. And maybe, I guess to a lesser extent, people appreciate that beavers are good little ecosystem engineers and can have a profound effect on the abiotic environment.
Well, at least they're starting to learn that. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Really.
But like one thing I've read in a geology book, some listened to on Audible. History of the Earth thing. I forgot which one. But it talked about how the only reason we have gems is because life evolved and produced oxygen. So a lot of gems would not exist without that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I was weirdly over beers last night. I was having a conversation about the profound impact that photosynthetic bacteria had on the planet, because that's the only reason why we have large iron ore deposits. Or before these bacteria came along, we had a reducing atmosphere and planet.
What do you mean by reducing?
Our oceans were bright turquoise green because they were not saturated, but there was just lots of iron in there. And then along comes these photosynthesizing bacteria that start creating this horrible waste product that was very toxic. And it was very toxic because it's very oxidative, very reactive. And so they start releasing oxygen. And then over the course of, I don't even know what it was, 100 million years or 500 million years, slowly all of the iron in the oceans precipitated out.
Oh, wow.
Settled to the bottom. And, it's a huge, profound impact on the whole planet, obviously, if you've totally changed the chemistry of the atmosphere of the planet.
Wow.
So
we're
not all that special. Organisms have been changing the atmosphere of the planet for a long time.
Can you remind folks what reduction and oxidation are?
It just has to do with how reactive a particular compound is. And so whether or not, so for example, iron oxide is rust.
Mm-hmm.
And so that would be basically the oxygen is able to covalently bond with the iron. And so it just has to do with whether or not, let me think how to, trying to put this in an easy way. It basically has to do with whether or not you're really hungry for electrons or whether you're willing to give away electrons. And so if you're hungry for electrons, you're going to grab, or you're going to be a reducer. And if you're happy to give away electrons, then you will be oxidized, and so give them away. And so it's just a chemical term that describes whether or not things are willing to give away or take electrons in basic chemistry.
And folks can remember, you probably hear about oxidation stuff in the body. But we got to remember that wherever there's an oxidation reaction, there's always a reduction reaction. You can't have one without the other.
Right.
So
exactly. Yeah. And then that's why people are interested in that in the body, and they're interested in scavenging what are called free radicals, because radicals might covalently bond with something you don't want them to bind with in the body.
Mm-hmm.
So if you've undergone oxidation, you've lost electrons, and if you like to gain electrons, then you've undergone reduction. You have been reduced. The easy way to remember that is that if you gain an electron, electrons are negative charges, and so your charge has been reduced.
That's the way I remember it. Yeah, cool. Yeah. And then, of course, oxidation is the opposite. You go up. But so, that shows, coming back to one thing I said earlier, how calculus is easy, biology is hard. I mean, heck, ecology, physics, geology, chemistry, biology. Yeah. A physicist doesn't have to work with all that, but an ecologist, all that stuff comes into play. It's very complicated, complex.
Yeah, there's a lot of things to keep track of, which is why people specialize on one little small thing.
Yeah. But so let's see, maybe let's and one thing for folks, the abiotic in our area, that would be flooding, like when Hurricane Harvey came through. We had, it's depending on where you were around Houston and the coast, west of Houston, east, we had 30 to 60 inches of rain in 3 or 4 days. Just massive rainfall, massive flooding around here. Some places in the creek, it was 5 or 10 feet underwater. Some places around Houston, I know I was kind of shocked and surprised that the water didn't subside in some areas till literally a month or two after the flood.
Wow.
It was amazing.
Yep.
But not something we got to deal with on the creek a lot, the flooding. So maybe we can make this a little concrete, like with ecology, looking at the relationships between things. So let's say, what might happen to our area if we got rid of all the snakes? How would that, so we'd have all these cascading effects, how would that affect the world we live in?
Well, I would guess, again, this is just based upon I'm not a snake biologist. I think that the accepted paradigm and the experiment that has been played out before when people have eliminated predators, snakes or, whether they be mammal predators or whatever they are, is that the things that they are feeding on tend to start doing really, really well. And so you get rid of all the snakes, you're probably going to have lots more rats and mice. And if you really want a lot more rats and mice, then, that could be a strategy for doing that. You probably don't want a lot more rats and mice for obvious reasons. First of all, nobody really likes rats that much.
Yeah.
But then, they can also be important carriers of diseases, et cetera, et cetera. And, that's what the snakes are doing. Snakes are just living out their lives, eating the stuff that you are probably pretty happy that they're eating, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
And that's true, with other predators as well. And, now there's a strong appreciation for that compared to, say, in the 1950s,
Yeah.
where, it was considered really good management practices to shoot hawks and eagles and eagles because that way you would have more game. And, that was a very naive view about the role that those predators are playing, and, an oversimplified view of how things are happening. So
Mm-hmm.
a lot of those unforeseen consequences of eliminating a predator for one reason or another. The example that I think is an amazing example is the sea otters off of the coast of the Pacific Northwest. There was this idea that, there's all these, little predator mammals that we're competing with for fish. And so they nearly drove that species to extinction. They pretty much eliminated them, not appreciating the fact that the favorite food of those animals were sea urchins. And you eliminated all of the predators that were feeding on the sea urchins. Now the sea urchin population exploded, and it started basically destroying all of the kelp forest, and it successfully, reduced the kelp forest greatly. And then all the fish left because there was no kelp forest. And so It's an interesting story of an unintended cascading consequence, that you think that you're removing a predator that you're competing with, and by removing that predator, the resource vanishes because there's no longer habitat for the fish. And so that's why it's important to always kind of think carefully about, what role is this particular organism playing in the environment. And oftentimes, predators, get a bad rap, whether they be larger predators that people think are eating their livestock, or whether or not it just be something that people are creeped out by, like snakes, and not really appreciating, what exactly role that they are playing. And, it just leads to a healthier system if you have all these kind of checks and balances, especially between, the producers and the consumers and the predators, which in ecology we like to, because, it's science, right? So you have to have a name for everything, but we refer to that as trophic levels.
Mm-hmm.
That's the level of, where you are feeding and where are you getting your energy from. So, yeah. So things like snakes and, other predators, coyotes or whatever they might be, are usually an indicator of at least a not too unhealthy system. I don't want to say they're an indicator of a healthy system, because they're very adaptable as well. You can see coyotes in very urban areas. They're a very adaptable animal. But yeah, predators are a good thing to have around. They're certainly keeping things in check that we probably like the idea of being held in check in the long run. We probably like that.
And yeah, so there's an example of many of why ecology is important, something we need to know because of things like that. And I can give a few other examples for folks, like Scribe Vineyards in California. I don't remember what book I heard about this in, but so these people are out taking care of their vineyard. Some guy's riding around on his horse. Oh, look, a rattlesnake. I don't like snakes. Rattlesnakes are bad. Kill it. Shoot it. Oh, there's another one. Kill it. Shoot it. And then the guy finds, wait, why are my grapes being eat up now? It's like, what's going on? Oh, the gophers are doing it. And instead of being like some people, oh, I got to poison the gophers now, the guy had better thinking skills, so he snapped. Oh, there's more gophers because I killed the rattlesnakes, and the rattlesnakes are one of the only things that can go into the den to get the gophers.
Right.
So I'm losing profits because I killed the snake.
Yep. Yeah, and there are people that actually, both for snakes or for bats and stuff, they actually try to put kind of a monetary value on how much is one really worth if you were to pay it to take care of your gophers and stuff.
Yeah. Some people do that. Yeah.
Those can be important things to consider. Definitely.
Yeah. And then a lot of people know about the wolves of Yellowstone, how they change rivers. If I remember, I can put up a thing about that. People have seen a little clip about that, but if you look at a longer one, I think that whole thing got all started by a hydrologist studying rivers and wondering why the river was not behaving as they usually do. And they think, is it global warming? Is it this other thing? Then they find out, oh, it's like after the wolves were introduced, I think it was then that they realized it was because the wolves weren't there.
Right.
Um,
Yep. Yeah, because wolves have ended up having a dramatic impact on the vegetation in Yellowstone because they've changed the foraging behavior of the large herbivores that they feed on, especially like, caribou and stuff like that.
And then the Kaibab in Arizona around the Grand Canyon. I think there's another example where Roosevelt and others wanted, as you talked about earlier, they wanted the game. Oh, let's kill off the predators so we can have more deer. Then they do that, and then because the bobcat, mountain lion, wolf, coyote, others have been killed, the deer population explodes, and then they start overgrazing, and then a lot of them starve to death.
Yeah, exactly. And the deer are a really good example of what happens when you have a limited amount of a top predator. And that's where it becomes really important that they are managed, because they can be incredibly destructive. They can totally change the vegetation and have all these cascading consequences because they're generally not, held in check, I guess, unless they're managed, right? Hunting. That's where hunting is actually really important, because if you don't do that, you could lose a lot of other things in the forest just because the deer will eat them all.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And yeah, we got some deer around here, and it's nice. It's good to see them. I think even though it's like in this suburban area, people might not think it, but I've even seen like at least 6 or 8 point buck around here. It's awesome.
Yeah, that's great.
But yeah, then we got to watch them though, like because around the roads, when deer are overpopulated, then there are a lot of car accidents.
Yeah, well, that definitely happens. Being from Michigan, that was a big one.
Yeah, too bad. But yeah, so we need coyotes and bobcats in our area to, although what they eat mostly mice, right? Rabbit.
Which ones?
Coyote and bobcat.
Probably, or other small mammals, or even small snakes, I would assume.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, certainly I would think that, like squirrels would be a happy thing for them to eat, or rabbits, or mice and rats and stuff like that. And again, coyotes are pretty opportunistic, so yeah.
But if they do control the deer at least a little bit. I know one time, a few decades ago, I was out on a horse, and it was fascinating out in some woods near a railroad bridge. And I came across a pack of, 3 to 5 coyotes chasing a small deer. That was fascinating. Just, they ignored me. The deer was running for its life. The coyote were after the deer. You could see the fear in the deer's eye. They just went right by.
Crazy.
And they were just, I don't know, within like 10 yards or something like that. I don't remember how close, but they were close.
Wow. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I've seen something similar to that once, but it was a pack of feral dogs. It wasn't coyotes.
Maybe I'm remembering wrong. This could have been like wild dogs, but given the area and all this stuff, I don't think so. I'm not sure.
It was probably coyotes. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
That seems pretty reasonable to me.
Yeah. But so there's some reasons why, we got to take care of that. Snakes, hawks, owls, coyote and bobcat. People might be kind of scared of them. It's like be scared of snakes, but at least, and like loathe them if you want, but at least appreciate them for what they do for our environment, make us healthy.
and learn a little something about them, and then you probably won't be as, uncomfortable with them. I mean, I think a lot of it is just people don't know, that much about them. So they don't really appreciate that they're not going to harm you. It's like it's you have to try hard to get bit by a venomous snake.
Yeah, true.
They're not out looking for you. They are trying to avoid you at all costs, basically.
And then people can see that on some videos I've made around coral snakes or copperheads. Maybe I'll post some of that. Yeah, I was scared of them too. But then being outdoors a lot, I've seen a snake and watched it from a distance, and then I learned that I can be a little closer. But because I'm like kind of slow and I don't trust myself to get too close, I'm not going to get too close. But I know
Right.
I can be within a few feet and take a 5-minute video of a copperhead, and it's not going to come after me. I'm not going to go after it. Everyone's all happy. We're all copacetic, and then we go our own way. But people don't really got to worry about them as much. But yeah, it's kind of funny. I say exactly what you did. It's like the snakes have some other purpose in the world than going after you.
Right. They definitely have better things to do.
Just like you, they want to live. They want to lie in the sunshine and enjoy it. And
Yeah.
they want to be left alone.
Get a belly full of mice.
Yeah. Yeah. But and then when they do, they don't want to do anything because they're lethargic. So.
Right. Yep. Yep. Yeah. So I would say, if you got predators hanging around, that's always a good sign.
Cool. And so yeah, and it's important on this, like people get in their subdivision, get in their house, drive around to buildings, and then lose sight of the broader world we live in. We need to keep in mind, or we should keep in mind and learn what's really making it possible. The broader nature around us, we depend on it. It doesn't depend on us. So knowing this ecology helps a lot. And what would you say, like, I know someone who said that he didn't understand what ecology was, apparently, and he thought that his backyard was his ecology. And I mean, he's got a garden back there and he grows some stuff, but some grapes and other things. But what are some of the mistakes he's making in thinking that his little backyard is his ecology?
I would actually, I'm not convinced that he is making any mistakes.
Interesting.
With you, it's again, ecology is just factors that are determining distribution and abundance. So there's a whole field of agricultural ecology, for example, like the actual ecology of agrosystems. Because again, you can think about what organisms are there, what's preventing them from maybe from being there, as well as what are the biogeochemical cycles that happen in agricultural land. So that is as much of the ecology as a pristine part of the Amazon. You could study ecology in a toxic waste dump, and a lot of people do that because they're really interested in the organisms that can survive in these toxic waste dumps, because maybe those organisms would be helpful for us to clean up areas that we would rather not have, toxic waste dumps. Apropos to the area of the world where you live, I have some colleagues that basically study bacteria that eat oil, and they go to drilling sites around the world in the ocean, and they sample bacteria where there's seeps and spills into the ocean, to understand who are the bacteria that are able to eat oil. And everybody would like to have a magic bug that you could spray on an oil spill and have it turned into a less lethal form. And so I don't think that it's necessarily wrong to say that the yard is the ecology, but it's clearly it's a managed system, and we are clever animals that can modify our environment a lot. But people do that. You can have, a bird feeder, for that matter, is really you're providing a resource to the birds. You are affecting their distribution and abundance. Whether bird feeders are a good or a bad idea is a topic for somebody else to talk with you about. But yeah, I would say that I think that that's okay as long as you appreciate that, it's a highly modified system. You don't know, it's unlikely that if nobody kind of took care of that system constantly with an input, that it would remain the way that it remains. But yeah, there's a whole ecology that can happen in your garden in the backyard. And I don't know if you've heard recently, they're encouraging people not to rake their leaves, and they're encouraging people maybe not to mow their lawn as much and stuff like that.
Cool.
And that's just all about, maximizing the potential for some diversity to occur there. And so a lot of things that, ecologists study, aren't really those pristine, beautiful areas. I've been fortunate in that I often am in pristine, beautiful areas. But I've also done quite a bit of work on, agricultural systems in the Great Basin, and looking at those agricultural systems as small oases for native insects to thrive in an area where they might not otherwise be able to thrive because it's the middle of the stinking desert. But agriculture has modified that. So I think that it's not necessarily a wrong way to think about it. I suppose it could be the wrong way to think about it, depending on what you think ecology is. But there are ecological interactions that are happening pretty much anywhere that there's life, by definition.
Yeah.
And with these managed systems, a lot of it breaks down to what kind of an environment do we want to live in, surrounded by. And what can maintain us. We can't have the whole planet being paved over, because we would start having cascading consequences that we probably wouldn't like.
Yeah.
And
I like your oasis idea. I think that's one thing I was trying to get to convey to him, that okay, it is his ecology to some extent, but you got to look at the bigger picture. It's an oasis in something. So where does your sunshine come from? It doesn't come from your backyard. Where does your water come from? It doesn't come from your backyard. How do you eliminate your waste? Your water and your waste don't stay there. Where do you get your food? You go to a farmer's market and a grocery store. So, and you got to consider the broader area that's affecting you. So yeah, I guess that's the thing I was trying to convey to him a little more.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. It's wrong to think of any system as being a closed system, and I think that's widely accepted now in ecology, that no systems are closed systems. In the early days of ecology, there were actually lots of arguments about whether or not we should think of communities as a closed system. Like, no, I studied this lake as a closed system, and now we know that all the inputs from the land and stuff affect the lake or the river or whatever it might be, and that things can't really be thought of as a closed system. You can't study the community of organisms that live in a river without appreciating that all of the surrounding area that is not part of that river is likely having a pretty profound influence on who is living in that river. And so that whole idea of a closed versus open system, I think, is an important thing, definitely.
Cool. So yeah, that apply to everyone living along the creek. It's like, we don't just have our house or apartment or subdivision or apartment complex. It's important to look at it in the bigger picture, because we influence it and it influences us. Just like, get rid of all the snakes, then you're going to be having more mice come onto your property, and rats and squirrels. And then some of that stuff will be, or maybe deer, and they're going to eat your garden, and stuff will eat up your plants and trees. And is that what we really want?
Right. Exactly.
But, so the ecological thinking is important. Learning about what ecology is, how to think about that, how to apply that to our world, and do it slowly. Go out in nature and start observing some of the relationships, and then think about how they apply to your lawn, your world, your health. It's in your self-interest.
I 100% would agree with that.
And then one thing I like to talk about the leaves and, pardon, go ahead, what?
I think it's really important for people to go outside and at least appreciate what's happening. Doesn't mean that everybody has to be, out trying to rigorously hike every weekend, because, maybe it's not for everybody, but everyone should have at least a little bit of an appreciation of, there's a lot of stuff going on outside your window, whether you live in an urban area or you live in the middle of, the forest. there's always a lot of things going on right outside the window if you just take a look. Probably any given tree in your yard during summertime, you could probably find 50 to 100 insects of different species on the tree. They would be really, really small, and you'd have to look really, really hard. It's just appreciating, the diversity that comes to your light at night when you have, your porch light on and it's dark out. You have all those, insects flying around. It's really, there's a lot of different things that are there. And if you just kind of take a moment to kind of appreciate that, I think that you'd, kind of intuit that there's a lot of complexity out there that we don't fully understand. And maybe it's best to be concerned about things we don't understand as opposed to dismissive.
Yeah. And as I like to tell people, pretty much everyone recognizes that wisdom is important for living well and living a good life. But wisdom doesn't come from looking at our own reflection in the mirror or the human reflection. It comes from knowing the wider world. Mm-hmm. And so that's exactly what some of this is. You need to know the wider world to know about life and the world we live in and nature, because we're part of it. So people are going to miss out a lot about how to live well and be healthy without knowing some ecology.
Yep.
Or study the insects. Well, maybe they might seem boring, but if you like birds, you like to see the pretty birds, well, we ain't going to have birds without insects.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. Yep. We're not going to have insects without habitat for the insects. So it's probably not a good idea to spray your lawn to kill all the insects, because they're probably not doing that much damage compared to the benefits that they're providing if you like to have birds, for example. Yeah.
And then removing the leaves and stuff, it's like, it occurred to me in studying some of that, that you're not merely, I mean, I didn't make up this on my own, I got it from other people, of course, but people think of getting rid of grass or getting rid of leaves, but we got to think that we're not doing that. We're getting rid of nutrients. All these nutrients were pumped up out of the soil, and it's kind of absurd. So, people get rid of the leaves and the grass and then pay money to like put more stuff down when they had the nutrients right there.
Yep. And a lot of times you're also removing a lot of the insects that might be your ally. If you break up all the leaves under the tree, you'll notice that a lot of those leaves have, little gulls on them, like they look like the warts on the leaf. And so sure, when you're getting rid of the leaves, you're getting rid of the little wasps that form those little galls, but then you're also getting rid of all the parasites of that wasp. And so the things that are actually helping defend your tree against these, herbivores, you're also getting rid of them as well, because you're getting rid of their habitat. In this case, the habitat would be the dead leaves.
Huh, yeah, it's interesting. So
that's the reason why it's nice to leave the leaves on the ground, because there's actually a lot of living things in a pile of dead leaves that, you don't really see unless you start looking really hard.
That's an important thing, too, about studying some of the ecology, to learn about habitat. We think about our own habitat, and this is all we need, but if we're going to survive, we need to take care of the things we depend upon, the plants and animals that we eat, for example. And so we need to think, okay, what is their habitat? And I hadn't thought of that before, of course, because, you're the ecologist and I'm just me. But the thing about removing leaves is removing the habitat. That's fascinating. That's one thing we can start thinking about all other areas and animals as well. What other habitats are there? What else are we removing? And why does it matter to get rid of the wasps? Aren't all wasps going to sting us, and aren't they all bad, and shouldn't we get rid of them?
Yeah, right. And vast majority of wasps are absolutely totally harmless to people. They couldn't sting us if they tried. Actually, most wasps are smaller than a grain of rice. And they serve as being either parasites on plants, or they're parasites on things that feed on plants. So they're actually quite a good thing to have around. But it's one of those things where most people wouldn't even recognize them as being a wasp.
Yeah.
It's just a little fly, a little tiny fly or something like that.
How many species are there? Like 1,000 or 3,000 of wasps, or what?
In general with wasps, the writ large, probably I would guess a lot more. Like I would guess at least 20,000, if not more than.
Wow.
There's over 500,000 described species of beetles, and there are some people that claim that if you looked hard enough, you would actually find more wasps than beetles. But again, these are like the movers and shakers that we never see. And I should also point out that wasp is kind of a generic term for a bunch of different groups of. They're in the same large grouping of insects, but the things that we commonly call wasps, there's actually a bunch of different families that we call commonly wasps. Kind of like bees, right? There's a lot of different things that we call bees. Like bumblebees and honeybees are in different, I guess subfamilies now, or however they're deciding to put the names on things. But yeah, wasp is a pretty general term. That's true for a lot of things, I guess, actually.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like moths or anything that's not a butterfly.
Yeah.
Kind of interesting way to think about it. But
or in terms of the importance of wasps, like I've heard in one book, some biologists think that we wouldn't exist if wasps weren't around, because our ancestors needed plants to live, but if the wasps weren't around to prey on the insects that eat the plants, they would have been much more effective predators, and we would have never been able to evolve because the greenery wouldn't have been here to support us.
Yeah, or I guess if it weren't wasps, it might have been something else. But there's certainly something that needs to occupy that niche. Especially there's so many. Yeah, so like thinking about how many wasps there are, I know the piece of trivia that there's over, I think, 100,000 described species of one particular group of wasps, which are called ichneumonic wasps.
Oh yeah,
and they basically specialize on being parasites on either other insects or directly being parasites on trees. But there's lots of them out there, and we just don't really appreciate that there's so many of them out there because they all look like bugs.
Yeah. I know a lot of people have studied them, but yeah, I know like Baron Heinrich and his dad were very interested in that particular type of wasp. Yeah. Cool. But and then people don't got to be worried about them as much. I mean, sometimes they'll come ask after you, I guess, if you're closer to their nest, but I've been around lots of wasps, really close. I don't do anything to them. They don't do anything to me. Or I've even found some hornets' nests, yellow jacket nests, and I'll get up fairly close and I take a video for like 5 minutes, and I leave them alone. They leave me alone, but I'm ready because I've heard that if one stings you, it puts out a chemical signal, then the others come after you. So I'm always ready to get the hell out of there if I need to.
Yeah. And you have to. And it's always important to remember that, like bald-faced hornets, nasty things. They will hurt you. Yellow jackets, they will hurt you. Paper wasps, they will hurt you. But there's probably only about, I don't know, I would guess maybe 10 to 20 species of wasps in North America that'll actually hurt you. But there's probably well over 100,000 species of wasps in North America. Most of them you wouldn't even recognize as being wasps. Some of them are really common things. We were talking about, you see the insects flying around your light at night. A lot of those insects that are flying around your light at night they're actually wasps.
Wow.
Ichneumon wasps. You can usually if you see an insect that has like a long straight thing coming out of their tail end, those are probably wasps because that's how they lay their eggs.
Interesting.
Actually, the stinger of the wasps that hurt us, that's modified egg-laying organ.
Wow. Interesting.
It's gonna sting you, right, for defense. But most wasps, they're just using their stinger basically to lay eggs. So they're terrifying if you're a caterpillar. But they're not so terrifying if you're a person.
Funny. Yeah. And why are they terrifying if you're a caterpillar?
Because they will lay an egg in you. And then you've seen the movie Alien, I'm assuming, right? The original Alien, where the guy, he starts feeling sick, and then the alien pops out of his belly. I'm convinced that idea is based upon the life cycle of an ichneumoniid wasp. because I've seen the same thing happen where a caterpillar will be walking along eating, and then it will stop eating a little bit, and then all of a sudden its back will rip open.
Wow.
And out crawl this wasp.
Wow, interesting.
And the wasp will fly away.
Wow.
And so, so it can be, again, if you're a caterpillar, you should be afraid of wasps. But if you're not a caterpillar, it's okay.
Then I know we love caterpillars because we love butterflies, but if we have too many, they're going to eat everything.
Yeah, they take care of that. Wasps help take care of that a lot, and then there's always the weather. When you think about what maintains, populations, if any given female butterfly had more than 2 offspring survive, if that happened to everybody, then the population of butterflies would skyrocket.
Wow.
So obviously a lot of caterpillars are not making it because, if you think even about like a big butterfly, like a swallowtail butterfly, they're probably laying 200 to 400 eggs as an adult. And really only 2 of them have to survive. Because if more than that survived, then we would be knee deep really quickly in butterflies.
Wow, I didn't know the survival rate was that low. Wow.
Yeah, I mean that's the general rule. Like that's actually one of the things that we have figured out in ecology because we haven't figured out it so much longer. But just kind of the properties of population growth that if you do more than just replace yourself, the population is going to start growing really quickly, and then you'll exceed your carrying capacity. So we have those huge outbreaks of insect swarms like locusts and stuff like that. They do a lot of destruction, but then ultimately their population crashes because they end up starving to death.
Yeah.
And so it's a self-correcting mechanism.
What are some other things that people can do locally in their own yard, in their backyard, in their general area besides leaving more leaves and maybe not cutting the grass so much?
I think planting natives, if you can plant native species, that's always an interesting, good idea. It's just both aesthetically, have, and also, have some pride in your local flora and fauna. So I think, planting native plants is nice because then it also will provide potentially habitat and resources for other native insects that, are always looking for resources. And, so much of our flora has been now dominated by invasive species that we always kind of have to work if we care about such things to try to plant more natives. I think that the most important thing really is to, as much as is possible, limit the application of pesticides. Because even though you think, a lot of pest things will be like, do you realize all this stuff is in your grass, and then we can spray these chemicals and we can take all the insects in the grass. But a vast majority of arthropods that are in your grass are beneficial to the grass. They're eating things that actually are damaging the grass. They're also, helping with nutrient cycling and with disturbing the soil, which is going to help the health of your grass or of your garden. And so there's a temptation to want to just, spray everything to kill everything. But, spraying your lawn isn't really going to keep mosquitoes down because, spoiler alert, mosquitoes breed in water. And so if you don't want mosquitoes, maybe clean out your gutters or turn over that bucket. But I think that the biggest thing that people can do just like locally in their backyard is to really try to eliminate as much as possible the application of chemical pesticides.
Yeah, so there's another important reason to study ecology or to ask ecologists about things. I think a lot of people want the short-term solution, or you think you can spray the chemicals and get rid of some of the insects, but we need the ecological thinking to think what's further going on.
Right.
Or to kind of be like in some Japanese business programs, I think it's from where they got the idea of the 7 Ys, WHY, not the letter Y, but instead of thinking, okay, so going to deeper levels of explanation, like we got insects and we don't want them, so what are we going to do? Spray them, kill them? Well, ask why. Then what is that going to do if you spray them? Like, do the insecticides and pesticides stay in the person's own yard in that little place, or what happens to them?
Yeah, and so they don't, right? It's like they go out into the environment, they indiscriminately will knock down anything that they come into contact with, and then if you have a lot of uses of those chemicals, eventually you'll start having pesticide resistance. I mean, we already see that in insects with, with kind of large scale chemical application in agriculture. A lot of those chemicals are not really very effective anymore against the important pest species because they've adapted to it. They've evolved resistance to that pesticide. Very similar to like what happens, with antibiotics and bacterial resistance, and why we're always in this arms race with
good point.
With that. And so, that's why it's like you should probably not take antibiotics unless you really need them, because if you do take them without really needing them, all you're doing is providing more opportunities to evolve a superbug, and likewise probably shouldn't, be putting all of these chemicals that you don't necessarily need to have in your yard. I mean, is anybody going to judge you because your rose bushes have some wilt on the leaf? I doubt.
Yeah.
I don't think people really care that much, frankly. And so, I think that, kind of being aware that these things have what we call a long half-life generally, which is how long it takes for half of it to leave the environment. And, when in doubt, you probably don't need to spray. I mean, if you have roaches running through your house, I will be sympathetic and say maybe you do roach bomb in your house. I can be sympathetic to that. But, if you just think there's too many bugs outside, welcome to outside.
Yeah. Think of the consequences. Yeah.
I think it was an entomologist. I think it was Borer, a beetle guy. So I probably falsely misattribute this really poorly remembered quote from him. But he basically said that insects run the world. It's about time that we make peace with the landlord.
Yeah, good point. Yeah.
Which I think is true. Most things that are multicellular organisms on the planet are insects, which is incredible to think about, that, more than half of all described life are insects. And pretty much half of all described insects are beetles. So 1/4 of all described life is a beetle. And then you start thinking, well, wow, I bet you have hundreds of beetles in your yard that you don't even notice because they're probably small. They're probably the size of a grain of rice or something like that. But there's a lot of diversity out there, and indiscriminately killing them all is probably not in our best interest.
Yeah. Yeah, and then one thing studying ecology, people have learned, and if we study ecology, more people in our area in Cypress Creek will learn that and apply it. I think people in studying evolution and some stuff, they think about competition, but just like with the sea otter example you gave earlier, a lot in biology is cooperation or beneficial interaction, not competition.
Right.
Like, get rid of the sea otter, and it's got bad effects on the fish ultimately. There's a lot of things that we should make peace with, like the insects, and try to cooperate with instead of trying to destroy because we don't understand it or hate it.
And at least I have it easy as somebody who advocates for those things, because I study butterflies, and everybody likes them.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
I feel bad for, I have a colleague that studies dung beetles, and it's like, really about dung beetles, but they're super important. They're actually way more important than we give them.
Interesting. Wow.
But, and so, like you said, I think that's why it's a good idea for people to kind of try to challenge themselves with learning a little bit about it. Because I think that if people really appreciated how many things are just living in their yard, it's pretty spectacular. And, you don't need to spray them all away.
Yeah.
They're not hurting anybody.
So I think we both got to go pretty soon. So we'll, of course, continue to wrap up a little bit. But one thing, what are some benefits of the native species? Like, why should people plant native species instead of other things? So what are some reasons?
Well, for a lot of things, native species will provide habitat for other native species. And so, you have organisms that have a long history with particular plants. Let's take butterflies. Many butterflies are specialized on a very small group of plants, and most of those small groups of plants that they're able to exploit in their native range are native plants. And native plants presumably are those plants that are most adept to deal with, local conditions. They probably don't require as much energy input to maintaining them. If you plant native plants in your yard, you're probably not going to have to keep an eye out for an aphid outbreak or a mealyworm outbreak or a mealybug outbreak or whatever it might be. And you're probably not going to have to supplement them with fertilizers and do all this other stuff because dealing with a plant that it has a long history of living in that particular area. So it is kind of part of the local fauna, and it's in some ways you can think about it, it's adapted to it. And then, the other argument for the for thinking about native plants is just that, it's kind of nice, I think, to kind of appreciate what has always been, or at least in a realistic scale, what has always been there, as opposed to it just being things that are, highly invasive weeds from some other area in the world. And it's a tricky thing, because a lot of people accuse people of being, xenophobic if they're, concerned about invasive species. But invasive species can have these cascading consequences that we might not want. They can dramatically change the environment because plants are doing a lot of things that we don't really appreciate. They're putting out chemicals underground. They're affecting other plants, and again, if they're a non-native plant, it's probably not going to provide nearly as many food resources as a native plant would. Generally, the things that tend to really hammer non-native plants are non-native herbivores. And so we're providing more resources to insects and stuff that are introduced to an area as opposed to being kind of part of the native flora and fauna.
Interesting. Yeah, and then what with they're adapted to the climate, so you don't have to water them as much. They'll get the water they need from local climate. As you say, you don't got to fertilize them as much or at all, and so you save money on that.
Yep.
Yeah, cool.
Yep. Yeah.
And then if some people go get outdoors around here, go for a walk and everything, observe, people would actually find that there are actually some beautiful flowers out here, like the prairie nymph. We got the what's it called? Passion vine. We got purple passion vine native out here, yellow passion vine. I've never seen the yellow in bloom yet, but I know I've seen the vine. If you want a beautiful flower, like plant those in your backyard. And
you get really wonderful caterpillars and butterflies as a consequence.
Oh,
That's the only host plant that the Gulf Fritillary will feed on.
Oh yeah, right, yeah. That's
I have in my yard. I have an area about the size of my office, which doesn't do anybody any good because all you can do is hear me. But it's probably about a 15 or 20 feet by 15 or 20 feet area in my backyard of nothing but Passiflora, which grew as basically a weed in my backyard, and I just started mowing around it. And then I'm like, oh, look at that. So I got a huge patch of it. And I had, I had probably 500 caterpillars on it.
Wow.
Of course, they're all dead now because it was super cold 2 nights ago, and they do not like the cold. But for a while, I had a lot of butterflies in the yard and a lot of caterpillars. And that was kind of fun, and it's pretty easy to do.
Cool.
And people noticed it in the neighborhood. They're like, yeah, have you noticed
yeah.
butterflies here? I've never seen this many.
Wow.
And I'm like, yeah, it's because my backyard is one big, giant Passiflora.
Nice.
So,
and then for folks, the Gulf Fritillary is what, kind of like a mimic of the monarch, if that might be a good description for him. But
they're orange. They're bright orange with silvery spots on the bottom of the wing. They're
beautiful.
They're a handsome animal. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Very handsome.
Well, cool. I'd like to continue, but we both got some stuff coming up. We better go. But so hopefully we learned a lot about ecology and the importance of ecological function and ecological thinking. Any last words, Jim?
Well, first, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
There's one thing. I made an error when I was talking 45 minutes ago that I realized. I'm trying to fix it now. I'm fully aware that there are no caribou in Yellowstone. I meant elk.
Okay. I didn't even catch that. Wow. Oh, cool.
It's my editor inside of me.
Yeah.
But yeah, well, no, thanks a bunch, and
Cool.
it was great talking with you.
Awesome. Okay, thank you. Have a
Yep.
good day. Talk to you
You
later.
too.
Thanks.
Bye.